Welcome to another broadcast of Vendée Radio. And today it is a great pleasure, great privilege to once again welcome Dr. John Rao. Dr. John Rao is a professor of history at St. John's University in New York. He is also the director of the eminent traditional organization, the Roman Forum, founded by Dietrich von Hildebrand. And he is former president of Una Voce America. Dr. Rao is an eminent historian and has published widely. Two of his very significant works are Black Legends and the Light of the World, the War of Words with the Incarnate Word, and Removing the Blindfold, 19th Century Catholics and the Myth of Modern Freedom. In my mind, Dr. Rao is one of the leading contemporary Catholic historians writing today, and it is an honor to be speaking to him once again. Dr. Rao, welcome back to Vendée Radio.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here.
Well, last time we spoke a couple of years ago on Vendée Radio was regarding the Ninth Crusade, the revival of the church's fortunes in many ways in the 19th century, and the response and the counter-revolution against the French Revolution, which of course was the culmination of the Enlightenment. What history has termed the Enlightenment really was an endarkenment, but it was this idolatry of the intellect, of human reason, unaided by the light of faith and by divine grace. But you have spoken and written very lucidly on the Enlightenment, the moderate and radical Enlightenment. And I'd just like to begin this discussion, which will be on the abolition of the Enlightenment, on the wrapping up of the Enlightenment that is ongoing today, with some words that you communicated to associates of the Roman Forum, which I think were quite profound in this regard. You said, quote, "Both our Catholic faith as well as the innate human reason that faith has given us the courage to take seriously have long prepared us for the disaster that has finally overtaken the naturalist Enlightenment world in the last 13 months. This was a couple of months ago. For let us remember that it is indeed that absurdly anti-Christian rationalist civilization that has now administered to itself a predictably irrational coup de grace. Nevertheless, I doubt that any of us expected the sheer audacity with which the perpetrators of an unparalleled, pseudo-scientific crime against humanity have forced their combination of arbitrary, ideological, and self-interested will upon the masses of the men and women of the materialist world that naturalism has created. Neither perhaps were we prepared for the overwhelmingly mindless slavishness with which the diktat of the oppressors has been unquestionably obeyed and enthusiastically endorsed by people who have long claimed to be stalwart defenders of critical thinking and free speech. Who in 2019 would ever have dreamed that seemingly every free-thinking liberal would summarily dismiss all rational debate and honest investigative reporting as conspiratorial madness, unworthy of consideration by people whose supposed common sense is now displayed through their pride in being isolated from one another, muzzled, locked down, bankrupted, and used as laboratory animals for big pharmaceutical companies? Well, maybe some of us, given the liberal historical track record. We Catholics who are aware of the full horror of the crime against humanity that has been perpetrated and how this evil is consciously being used to strangle all that is true, good, and beautiful, have a greater responsibility than ever before to maintain our commitment to a faith that is the real bulwark of reason and civilization, a faith that has never betrayed us either as individuals or as social beings. It is impossible to overemphasize the need for us to embrace our enhanced mission to learn more and to act more vigorously against the anti-religious oligarchy oppressing us, not as lone rangers masked and 6 feet apart from our neighbors, but as noble, militant members of the mystical body of Christ interacting with one another face to face," end quote. And then you go on to introduce the program for the summer Roman Forum symposium, which will be non-virtual and in person, fully Catholic and fully human. Deo gratias. So I thought that was a very eloquent description of the travails, the tribulations that we have all experienced in the last year and a half. And I think you've really hit on there the fact that the Enlightenment universals, these these features of the Enlightenment, the irrational Enlightenment ideology, such as democracy, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, universal education, even the scientific method, have all sort of found themselves on the chopping block, whether it's with the American election fraud last year, or it's with the attempts to frustrate Brexit here in the United Kingdom, the growing censorship on the internet, the clampdown on freedom of speech, the blanket censorship of any scientific opinion that departs from the conventional manufactured pandemic narrative, the fact that universal education has been turned off for many months as students learn through technical devices, supposedly. And then the willful denial on the promulgation of all sorts of lies, such as the prevalence of asymptomatic transmission, the spreading of COVID on surfaces, the reliability, the fraudulent PCR test. With that long introduction, just to say that the Enlightenment itself is being wrapped up.
That's how you, in fact, I'm rather impressed at what I wrote. It sounds pretty good. No, exactly. And what strikes me, just looking at what has happened and thinking about it still more, is the logic of the way all of this has developed, and once again, the prophetic awareness of what was going to happen on the part of the people that taught me, not taught me personally, but taught me through their works, the ones that I focused on primarily from the 19th century. They saw this as the obvious end result of the supposed opening of the human mind, which would actually be a shutting down of it.
Yes, and it's quite notable how this wrapping up of the Enlightenment could be characterized as part of a shift, a transition from modernity to post-modernity. And I'm sure you're aware of the famous dialogue between Jürgen Habermas, the German atheistic philosopher, with then Cardinal Ratzinger, where he tries to almost kind of recruit the church sort of through Ratzinger to help buttress and defend these Enlightenment universals that he quite rightly identifies as being under threat from the postmodernists.
Yes. No, I think of Ratzinger, Benedict, a good deal in this regard. Remember the comment that he made that got him into such trouble when he quoted, I think, the Eastern Roman Emperor John about the Muslims lacking a logos, and in point of fact, that's what the Enlightenment lacks, is a logos. And it has always been, as far as I can see it, rooted ultimately in the whole nominalist problem and the whole adulation of will, and ultimately power over everything else.
Yes, and so when you see today the outright denial of the biological reality of sex, the claim, the representation of the scientific method or of logic or of being on time as white patriarchal constructs, when you reach that level of absurdism, you're saying that that's actually, those phenomena are actually very much on a trajectory, the end point of a trajectory of the early Enlightenment, which itself was based on a truncated vision of human reason.
Yes, well, I mean, I would go back even further than that. One of the most important works that influenced my own development is a 5-volume work from the 1920s and 30s, an author that you can find very little biographical information about, named Lagarde, which is called the Birth of the Lay Spirit in the Late Middle Ages. And Lagarde, talking about the development of the whole battle that philosophically is represented by the extreme nominalist movement, he points out already in the roots of this in the late 1100s, 1200s in particular. He points out how what you've got is a movement of heretical ideas a denial of the ability of the human mind to be able to really achieve anything, as though any effort on the part of the human mind to reach some kind of universal conclusions about things is blasphemous against God, and money. He says all of these three things together are clearly operating to bring down the movement on the part of the Catholic Church in particular to use more modern terminology, transform all things in Christ. And already in that 5-volume set, which is dealing with a period from the late 1100s down through the 14th century, the 15th century rather, what you've got is, I think, what lies behind the practical development of the Reformation, and then the Enlightenment, and then now this bizarre, ultimately Nazi-like phenomenon that we're dealing with right now, the triumph of the will, just the triumph of the will, and the exaltation in your power in order to be able to have that will triumph, while at the same time claiming that you're still committed to this grand movement of science and freedom. I don't know. I mean, I doubt that in Britain you've had, or maybe equivalent to it, you find on the windows and on the front doors of the liberal-minded folk around the United States this list of desiderata or claims, which says things like science matters, Black Lives Matter, and it goes through a whole litany of different things that's supposed to then show that you are a defender of all things true, good, and beautiful. But it's all in the service of this power play, which once again is being dominated by an oligarchy of forces which, well, I mean, our one hope is that they're not necessarily all united with one another. And you can see now that a number of them seem to be tossing those who look weaker under the bus in order to protect themselves, beginning here with dear Dr. Fauci.
Mm. Yes, that very, that concept of the scapegoat is something that they seem to resort to time and again. But I think with the overall COVID psyop, you have a convergence of many different interests, perhaps opportunistic, perhaps more coordinated.
Right.
Certainly, pharmaceutical companies enjoyed huge dividends financially. You know, Wall Street was bailed out or given something to the tune of something like $6 trillion. BlackRock was given to play with, and the wealth transfer that represents with the forced shutdown of small businesses in particular, and the ability to buy up property with that kind of devastation of the local economies. St. Paul obviously says that the love of money is at the root of, well, the translation is either the root of all evils or the root of all kinds of evils. But I think there are some of these oligarchy interests which certainly are looking to profit financially, but also they perhaps have an even more overtly diabolical agenda with this, desire to create a totalitarian digital control system. Right.
Well, it's a number of things that I've read over the past year, combined together with research I had to do. I was forced to do, actually, to take part in one conference in particular, a number of years ago, and then combined together with my own personal research into the Enlightenment, have all worked together to make vivid just how horrible this world that a number of these powerful forces are eager to bring into being. There's a friend of mine who's come to the program in Italy a number of times. I don't know whether I should mention his name lest there be repercussions against his academic position, but he wrote a kind of popularization of research that's been done by a number of people at the Sorbonne and then Harvard about the technological developments that enable those who are willing to pay for them and use them to be able to really set up a control system over the globe at large in ways that even just 20 years ago would have seemed science fiction-like in character. And his description of this, and I can't remember whether this comes from the more scientific based researchers or whether this is his own way of popularizing it, but was rooted in Jeremy Bentham's prison reform scheme of the 19th century. I think it's called the panopticon. Because apparently the technological developments that now are at the command of the media and of great concentrations of power that want to use the technology for money purposes, or perhaps a combination of political and money purposes, is such that it's like the panopticon, that the ones who are in control are hidden to those who are being controlled, and yet have the strings attached to all of those who can't see who's controlling them very, very firmly in their hands. Even a short time ago, I would have considered this myself to have been conspiratorial in character, but it's quite clear that it's not at all. It's the reality that we live in. Then, talk about this conference that I was forced to do research for some years ago. It was a conference, an international Catholic legal conference, organized by this good friend of mine, Miguel Ayuso from Spain, held in Mexico, and it was on transhumanism and posthumanism. And he wanted me to be able to talk about this subject in a broader historical context. I told him I knew nothing about it. He said, well, this is a good opportunity to learn something about it. And it was a big eye-opener to me doing that research, because once again, it made clear to me that there were honestly these people who were putting into practice these projects, which would have seemed science fictional in character to me just a short time before. And once again, that they involved the crew at Davos, they involved Bill Gates, they involve vaccinations, it involved genetic research, they involve all kinds of projects and tools that bringing into the public view on the part of people like ourselves are treated as though they're conspiratorial in character, but which are advertised by these people in their own writings and in their own websites. And then to go back to the personal enlightenment research of mine, I can't remember whether last we talked, I may have even mentioned this, but Diderot in his discussions in the 18th century of developing matter, because he's a Spinozan and he's an evolutionist in his own right. He just notes outrightly that the idea that there's anything that's distinctly animal, vegetable, and mineral that can't transmute into anything else is ridiculous, because everything can become something other. And so he there in the 18th century, at the beginning, or developing the beginning radical Enlightenment arguments, already is stating the end result. Diderot would not be surprised to hear what the transhumanists and posthumanists have to say, and would apparently rejoice in the fact that there are all kinds of tools available to achieve what their horrible projects are aiming at.
Yes, it's what Dr. Alan Phimister called metaphysical trench foot. The idea that there are no natures of things, right, and that you just bleed into things. But I think it's quite notable what you say about the Enlightenment thinkers themselves seeing today's events as a fulfillment of their vision, because the current running through it is Gnosticism, this idea that creation itself is a mistake or somehow flawed. So with transhumanism, you have, in a way, the culmination of that that I'm going to kind of escape the prison of my body and upload my consciousness into a computer, or I am actually a woman on the inside and I need to kind of to mutilate my own body in order to correspond my physical form to my inner true self. The Gnosticism is more and more sort of overt.
Right, right. Well, of course, again, now that this has been transmitted to the population at large, it's wildest, magical, and Gnostic, and potentially just explosive character is clear. I mean, in a man like Diderot, for example, Diderot in his letters at times laments what will come as a result of the whole project that he's engaged in, because he was himself a literary man, and he talks about the fact that what's going to disappear in this is the whole literary world, which is the world that provided him the abilities to transmit his message in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're going to have left, I mean, I don't remember him saying anything about this, but I mean, it seems quite obvious to me that once you have an ability to achieve what it is that he seems to be indicating you're going to have the ability to achieve, but it's in the hands of the mob in general, what you're going to get is just simply grunts and groans of cave animals manipulating the end result. So the end result might be scientifically quite developed, but what will come in the generation after that, I don't know. I mean, the sorry, I seem to be skirting around plunging into an issues, but it always amuses me that, you know, the international Marxist community that traveled and spoke many languages ended up producing the world of Joseph Stalins, who were parochial and had no familiarity with anything other than the power structure that Marxism, Soviet Marxism, Leninism gave them. And similarly with the American Revolution, all of these Latin and Greek and French speaking American revolutionaries ended up creating a generation of Andrew Jacksons who were really just manipulators of democratic power and had no interest in what it is, or no ability to be able to play around with what created the world that they lived in. So these people, yes, I mean, they've created or they've helped to create this incredible technology and scientific machine that will be placed or is placed in the hands of people who I don't think we'll be able to maintain it for any length of time. And whether it will all go up in just simply one big explosive disaster, or just be left in the hands of people who don't know what to do with it, like children having some machines at their disposal. I don't know.
Yes, a feature of the revolution with a capital R, well, is the fact that it is inherently contradictory and incoherent.
Right.
The only commonality one can draw is the utter hostility towards the church and Christian civilization. That's the characteristic that all these revolutionaries sort of share. And I suppose a symbol of this, someone noted, was the crown of thorns, that it's got the thorn as the punishment of Adam is a plant with too many points, too many vertices, you know, then it's completely chaotic. And that's what you see with the revolution as well. I wonder when, with these men of the Republic of Letters, Diderot, I mean, going further back, Descartes famously talked about being receiving some kind of revelation from an angel of light. How much do you think these revolutionary figures are in kind of direct contact with the preternatural, and the fallen angels actually sort of give them gnosis about certain things to help sort of propel the dissolution of Christendom?
Well, you know, I mean, ironically, if my memory serves me correctly, it seems as though the ones that are more in contact with with what we would consider to be esoteric and potentially demonic forces are a lot of the people who are involved with the more moderate Enlightenment. I mean, for example, what is her name? Margaret Jacobs, I think it is, who's done a lot of research on the radical and the moderate Enlightenment, and she has been one of the scholars who's made clear just how much Freemasonic circles are very much important historically. And in the 18th century, in the 19th century, Masonic schools, obviously in France and elsewhere, become more radical in character, but they viewed themselves as being in the 18th century tied in with deist ideas, with the idea of a creator God, and they seem to have played around with all sorts of esoteric movements much more. I don't think Descartes, I don't think Diderot was involved with that kind of stuff. One person who is a radical in the democratic sense of the Enlightenment, not a kind of Lockean who wants really an oligarchy to control things, but who's very active in the American realm is Thomas Paine, who very much served to radicalize the American Revolution with his book Common Sense in 1776. He was involved in esoteric circles of various sorts, the exact nature of which I can't remember, but they do lurk around there and play a role. I think the more radical forces consider themselves to be above that. I mean, the founders of the whole thing. Descartes, of course, he claims much more Christian inspiration from visiting shrines in Italy, from Loreto, I think it is. I think it's his visit to Loreto, which is one of the things that he points to as inspiring him. And then this famous incident during the 30 Years' War, where he feels inspired to try to work to rebuild unity in a fashion that somehow gives him the ability to dismiss everything that everybody else has done before him, to begin thinking from scratch again. But it's there. It is there, but it's not necessarily as neat as we would want to think it is. That we could associate it clearly with the most logical radical thinkers. It certainly plays a great role in the more willful movements that are spewed forth from the Enlightenment, particularly, say, in the creation of something like Nazism. I mean, there's definitely esoteric forces that are involved, and then that ties in with all kinds of romantic nationalists, democratic nationalists, radical Carbonari movements. They're steeped in this stuff, and that is in many cases demonic in character.
Yes, Dr. Plinio Correa de Oliveira, you're probably aware, observed that the revolution has different gears. So, and he said that in many ways, a low-speed revolution like Anglicanism is far more effective than a high-speed revolution like Anabaptist Munster in the 16th century, because it's too radical for that time and it provokes a reaction. Whereas Anglicanism, as I think David Hume said, was so effective at causing the apostasy of the English people because it sort of lulled them to sleep that they still had some kind of observance of the gospel and worship of God, while simultaneously sort of slowly dismantling the Christian social order.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I'm glad that you brought up Anglicanism, because I'm thinking now in a way that then brings up a number of these converging forces that played a role in destroying the Catholic Church in the 20th century on the basis of new theology and liturgical changes and ecumenical activity and the like, because I remember from my Oxford days, and also certain studies that I was doing involving 19th and then early 20th century religious developments, just how much there was a connection between certain, not all. I don't want to tarnish real serious believers in this regard, but there was a connection between certain high Anglican circles that were very fond of the entire high liturgical tradition, and esoteric movements, very much rooted in Oxford, also in the years, I think in particular in the 20s and 30s, maybe even earlier. And in fact, some of the people that I worked with would bring up names. I can't remember the names. There was a deep interest in a number of mystical-minded, high liturgical-minded figures trying to escape from what was considered to be the overly legalistic Roman tradition and Thomistic philosophical tradition, and then find ways to build bridges to some of the more esoteric, orthodox, mystical sources and the like, that end up playing around with phenomenon that are, I think, dangerous in character. And in fact, I remember also Alice von Hildebrand. And this is going way back into the 70s and the early 80s. I remember Alice von Hildebrand talking about certain of the circles of the 20s and 30s that her husband Dietrich von Hildebrand was familiar with, ending up exploring different esoteric realms that they then backed away from, but involving the occult, really. So there seems to be something appealing about that whole esoteric occult phenomenon, that everybody trying to escape the more rational and dogmatic Catholic past find it gives them a little frisson, of excitement.
Yes, and it is occult, it is secret. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the preternatural interventions in history are more subtle than perhaps people might presume. A chap called Joe Atwill, who said, Facebook was created in order to lock us down. And you can think of that in terms of a grand conspiracy where they created Facebook in 2005 or wherever, and they plan to lock us up in 2021, which could be the case, but it also could be the case that someone who is struggling with a certain sin in their life, for example, receives an illumination or an idea from the dark powers and creates that form of social media. And then the fallen angels are also planning this lockup that we've seen in the last year and a half, 15 years down the line. So there is a diabolical intelligence, but it's not necessarily sort of disaggregated amongst various human actors. But there's certainly the case that this tool, Facebook, social media, has made possible a mass confinement of people in a way that I don't think would have been possible even 20 years ago. It creates this tremendous sort of docility
right.
and kind of acceptance of having one's civil rights completely violated
right.
by the authorities.
No, I think that's absolutely true, and it's the logic of it all seems to have fallen into place. I mean, the logic of it in the sense of now looking back and seeing that despite its valuable aid, the computer, and then all of the phones and the constant poking at the phones and focusing on just your own private phone conversation, even in the midst of a crowd of 10 other people at a dinner party, that it's all working together to create a mindless population that's then willing to operate in a cultic way, as all of these different developments that we've seen have developed their own cultic demands that are being followed by people. I mean, the mask cult and the cult of the vaccine and the cult of acceptance of every kind of radicalization on the part of people you never would have expected to accept this. It all does to work together in a way that on the surface apparently contradicts what the goals of the people first promoting it seem to be all about. I mean, globalism and globalists have led to a world in which everybody's locked up in their own particular country, yes, and in their own particular neighborhood, in their own particular house. I find that, just like with the Facebook phenomenon, quite extraordinary. Facebook, which is supposed to connect, censors. Globalism, which is supposed to unite people, is now creating a world where everyone's trapped, separate from one another. Bizarre. Yes. They're being punished in a way by being shown for creating the total contradiction, the total opposite of what they claim that they were in favor of. And if that's not diabolical, if that's not diabolical disorientation, I don't know what is. But it is disturbing. One thing that's been good, let's say, for example, in my neighborhood where I mean, Greenwich Village has got a reputation for being a place which is among the most progressive in the world, but it's got also a solid core of people who are strong enemies of all of this stuff as well. And one thing that's happened over the course of the past 15 months, and for me personally, has been a great joy to discover a core of resistance in my neighborhood that has linked me together with people that I've seen on the street and can recognize the faces of, but never knew that I shared a spiritual union with. And a lot of them, I should say a lot of them, for a number of them I've come into contact with, they've dotted the I's and crossed the T's on what has happened historically, which has been an eye-opener for them. And I'm thinking of one woman in particular whom I know, who now finds herself the enemy of all sorts of causes that she had been in favor of for most of her life, because she's seen now where they really lead. So that's hopeful. But
yes, I see
still,
many green shoots like that. Yes, and surprising people who turn their lives around or are suddenly curious about the faith and understand the inevitable consequences of the culture of death in the way that they might not have in a time of prosperity and seeming peace. So yes, I think God has brought great good out of it. And as you say, all the sort of, personally, I've been going to sort of clandestine masses when they've been prohibited, and clandestine social gatherings, and really that instinct to return to the catacombs and sort of grow below ground, people being drawn to that.
But to go back to the logic of the development, what I just plucked out of Philip Hughes to use for this program that we're going to be having in the next couple of weeks, I plucked out this lengthy statement that he makes in the last of his volumes on church history, which unfortunately ended at the time of the election, was able to extend that work in the detail that he did beforehand. I still find Philip Hughes one of the most enlightening church historians, Catholic church historians, but he's got a description of Luther and what Luther has done. And his description of what Luther is all about, what Luther has done, emphasizes the fact that he is really, in effect, put together everything that was developing in a way that was contrary to the main line of the development of the Catholic Church. He put together all of that in a brilliant way, and then added his own personal and very, very effective rhetorical manner of presenting it, in a fashion that connects with the book that I mentioned, the volumes I mentioned beforehand, the Lagarde volumes about what was happening in the late Middle Ages as a whole. And he summarizes it, and you can see when you read Philip Hughes's comment how it all fits together and how it ultimately connects with what I mentioned before. Lagarde's statement, it's heretical ideas. I don't think that I added to the recipe that he brought up, the need for the rhetorical. You need the sophistic rhetorical talent to be able to present these heretical ideas together. And you need money, and you need the money. You need the money people who don't want to be bothered by being held back by anything that is a restraint from the Socratic Christian tradition. It's all there, logically developed. And I now see exactly the same thing with what we've experienced the past 15 months. It's just the logical conclusion of everything that has come about, not just through the Enlightenment ideas, but the previous revolutionary ideas, now brought together, and then demanding assent to the kind of world that it wants to create, but with this again bizarre, satanic, cultic, liturgical envelope, in which the masks and the vaccines as a sacrament, and all the rest play their role. But I can see a Philip Hughes, a man with the talent of the Philip Hughes, taking his citation there about Luther, and then just simply applying it to the whole COVID madness, and the Davos madness, and all of the other groups that are contributing to all of this, and saying, well, this is the logical end to everything that has been propagated since the 17th century, tying into what came beforehand.
That's fascinating. Yes, I think great minds have seen that history isn't circular or cyclical, but it is fractal, or there are recurring patterns and archetypes, certain narrative logics that play out. And I think you see that with the pattern of revolution. And that's why I think studying the Protestant Revolution, studying the French Revolution repays the effort is very important. I've been reading recently a book on Philippe Duc d'Orléans, Philippe Égalité, the godfather of the revolution, who bankrolled it, and some of the work the historian Auguste Cochin did to analyze some of those sort of secret networks that were sort of conspiring before the revolution to destabilize the Ancien Regime, and some of the money trails to different Jacobin clubs and the Palais Royal that he was at the center of. I think that can be helpful to then analyze our current situation as to where the power is being, where it resides, and where it's pulling the strings for different narratives and different revolutionary figures.
Right. Well, also to go back still further now, so that, we've gone from what we're experiencing now to as a summary of everything that's developed since the Enlightenment. And then that tapped into the Reformation as being a summary of everything that was developing from the 1100s onwards, to build the Reformation, and then the Enlightenment, and so on and so forth. To go back to what I mentioned in the Black Legends book at the very beginning, which extends the history still more, and then which is so ably presented by the volumes of the great German scholar Werner Jaeger in his book Paideia, Greek Paideia, and then a subsequent volume of his Greek Paideia and Early Christianity. It's again that anger that is represented by the sophists at the Socratic attempt to step back and judge whether human action really is something that can serve as its own measure, or whether you need something else involving the mind, and then ultimately something beyond the mind, to correct your activity. The anger of the sophist and the insistence upon rejecting that whole project and then just imposing the human will and then linking yourself up with every force that wants to be able to just seek power and riches without any kind of restraint on it, that's already clear there as something which is going to give birth to the effort to try to forestall the whole Catholic project of transformation in Christ, and then the whole project to bring down the rational and the religious and then even the scientific revolution on the part of these transhumanists and posthumanists that we see now, who just simply want things to be whatever it is that they want them to be. So I mean, it's there really, you know, from that ancient origin, and then, you know, if you want a summary of the whole thing, once again, I'm always struck by the comment of Plato in his Laws, where he says, you know, he says, in order for the individual to resolve his problems, he needs a good society. In order for a good society to resolve its problem, to be created, needs good individuals. And then he says, I don't see how this problem is going to be resolved unless some God comes to save us.
Yeah.
You know? And you know, we believe that he did with Christ, but that doesn't end the problem because we have to still cooperate with it. And right now, I mean, you know, my evening. I don't mean to be. I shouldn't be flippant about this. But my evening salvation comes with my gin and tonic. But that's not going to do the trick. And if I oftentimes don't see how we're going to be able to deal with this unless some sort of help from beyond comes to end our woes.
Yes, well, there's been various prophecies about obviously a great chastisement, and many Catholics believe that is. But of course, the great obstacle to this, well, particularly this psyop of the last year, should be the Catholic Church,
Right.
Should be the hierarchy, should be lay Catholics. And a friend of mine talks about how there is a kind of wrapping up or a winding down. So as to what you described of the church declaring to the entire world that the sacraments were a non-essential service and shutting churches, shutting down public masses, sometimes preempting government dictates to do so. But this prompts the question, why are bishops doing this? And my friend says that perhaps that is the point. Perhaps some officials of the Catholic Church are in the process of winding down an organization that the management no longer see as necessary. And politicians almost doing the same thing, kind of winding down the nation state, which they think won't exist in a century. It might not be explicit in their minds, but it's every institution, in a sense, natural and divine, seems to be going through what Gibbon observed of the nations of the Roman Empire just before the migration period.
Right. No, that is, I mean, certainly when you think about it from the religious standpoint, it was, I mean, in a positive way in this regard, but nevertheless, it serves as an analogy. It's to a large degree pagan priests who wound down paganism because they did not feel that it had any real leg to stand on. And in that case, there was a positive result that many of them transferred over to the Christian scheme of things. But then again, it was Catholic priests to a large degree who initiated the Protestant Reformation. And it's also a number of insider figures inside the monarchy and inside the church who aided the whole revolutionary movement of the late 18th century. And it's given the fact that a lot of people who enter into higher realms of power often do so for less than substantive motives. It stands to reason that there could be, well, a lot of the people who are in positions of authority in the church who are looking to use this current situation as an excuse to just simply take the money and run, you know, just get out of anything that is real that's Catholic, and then just join with the what the future holds in store, or with what they think the future holds in store for us. But it is extraordinary, yeah. I mean, it does look as though the political authorities just simply have thrown up their hands and have decided to dismantle things, and it's still hard to figure out who it is that's winning out of all of this, and how much incompetence enters into what's being done as opposed to conscious design. Very hard to figure out, but it seems to be certainly a free-for-all with everybody leaping into the pit together in an extraordinary way that's never before. Yeah, I mean, in the past, there's always been at least some segment of some authority that was there to serve as a kind of safety net, but now, going back to the oligarchy argument. The Angelus magazine, which is the SSPX magazine here in the States, had its latest issue on the current situation. So I wrote them this article, which is called "Gangster Society, Gangster State, Gangster Church," because of the fact that it strikes me that that what you've got coming out of the entire modern mentality and the breakdown of everything is precisely criminally ideological, or just downright criminal oligarchies taking control of society, taking control of the state, and now in effect taking control of the church, people who are not rooted in any kind of rational or revealed law, and just pure will. From the top on down.
Yes, and the fact that there was, even if you buy into the narrative about the relative danger of COVID-19, which is, you know, highly suspect because of the padding of the figures, the inflation of the figures, the use of the fraudulent PCR test to create a case-demic, and all these different things, the labeling of other respiratory illnesses, respiratory deaths as COVID-19. Even if you buy into the mainstream narrative, the absence of any kind of cost-benefit analysis of weighing up whether locking down, of whether, you know, saving 82-year-olds from dying then rather than dying when they were 83 or 84, of weighing that up against the effects of lockdown and the devastating psychological effects and economic effects on the social fabric, the social cohesion. The fact that debate is not permitted in the mainstream media is indicative of serious malevolence. And the fact that the episcopate in large part sort of buy into the narrative and have this a priori assumption of goodwill on the part of the oligarchs, who are the same people who are promoting, you know, mutilation of children and slaughter of children with the unborn. The idea that they would sort of, you know, be of goodwill, and that you should receive a kind of experimental injection that they've come up with, it's incredible.
It really is incredible. But again, just talking about the unity of all of these forces together, it's one of the things that always strikes me is that one of the greatest frauds of the modern world, involving the idea that you're promoting the separation of church and state, has led to the tightest union of church and state in support of a common cultic dogma that's ever existed in the history of the world. I mean, the Pope touts the same line as every political leader, the pharmaceutical companies, big tech, Davos. They're all promoting exactly the same theme, and we're supposed to be praising the society that we live in for having divided up these various powers, but it doesn't. It's not true. It's just not true. And once again, it's clear that you've got this oligarchic minority, but nevertheless, are they united really ultimately? Can they be united given the fact that they all have the same seemingly purely naturalist, materialist vision of things, which would lead them to sacrifice one another if a profit or any other kind of personal gain might enter into the picture? Will they destroy one another in the process of building this brave new world that they're creating? I don't know. It's just unclear where this is ultimately all going. Will it fall apart of its own steam? Will some great saint come up to be able to help to guide us? We're just waiting, just wait.
Yes.
Patience has never been my virtue. So, it's quite hard.
I sympathize. Dr. Rao, you've been very generous with your time. I wondered if I could just ask you about your thoughts on the traditional movement and its place in this overall story. There have been rumors of a suppression of Summorum Pontificum on the horizon, and the movement has undoubtedly grown in the last year as thankfully more people have opened their eyes to the depth of corruption in the society and also sadly in the church, and have embraced the sort of fullness of the Catholic faith as expressed in the fullness of the church's liturgical tradition, Orthodox communities. So, and this is now attracting the notice of the oligarchs. It's sort of like the eye of Sauron is kind of turned. How do you see that happening? I mean, you're a veteran of long years of basically persecution on the part of many church authorities of the traditional community, but it seems like traditional movement is too strong for that now.
No, I don't think that we will ever go back to the situation that we were in beforehand. It's, first of all, it's much too self-conscious now, the traditionalist movement. It's much too self-conscious. It is more and more becoming the church. One could see this for decades already. Every time one went to Chartres and saw the youth marching in, the seminarians, the priests who are part of the traditionalist movement, it's just much too strong now. And the so-called main as you get, and you do get very good seminarians and priests coming in, itself attracted by the traditional movement. One of the things that's been in my mind after this notice of a probable attack coming from Rome is what the effect would be on the Archdiocese of New York, because the seminary of the Archdiocese of New York is filled with seminarians who want to say the traditional Mass. And what that would be, I think, is the coup de grace for the seminary here in New York. It's inconceivable that the so-called mainstream church will survive. It's only the traditional church that provides it with its recruits for the future. The only ones who are going to be left are the entire oligarchic crowd that has no interest in Catholicism, many of whom could be seen depicted. There was a photo op of the whole crew, including Davos people and Rockefeller Foundation people around Pope Francis, labeled the Guardians. And they're the only ones who would be left for that. It's too self-conscious now. There's also a clearer awareness in a way that did not exist at the time of the Second Vatican Council of the proper understanding of papal power and the limits of papal infallibility, without people feeling as though they are disloyal. They know now how what the focus of their loyalty to the See of Peter is, what the limitations of it are, what the reality is all about. And there will be a battle royal if anything is done that eats away at Summorum Pontificum. And given what we've seen, and we've been talking about this whole past hour, about the Enlightenment's destruction of itself and its whole scientific and its whole rational basis that has been underlined by the reaction, the fraudulent reaction to this rough flu that came out of China. What you're going to see in any kind of effort to destroy Summorum Pontificum is not just a battle against what would be considered to be an abuse of papal power, but it's going to be a battle against reason. Against the abuse of reason, because you cannot rationally attack what Benedict did. In fact, in preparing for this whole conference, what's interesting to see is that what Benedict stated in Summorum Pontificum is exactly what, on the one hand, Archbishop Lefebvre, and on the other hand, people like Dr. de Saventum and the Una Voce movement said from the very beginning, that the only answer to this problem is to admit that they could not abolish the traditional Mass, and they did not abolish the traditional Mass. And that was clear already to the Cardinalatial Commission in 1986 that met. And it's what Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, said ultimately in Summorum Pontificum. What Francis will try to do, or what Francis might do, will be an assault not just on the faith, but an assault on reason. And it's not going to work. It's just not going to work. It's not going to work at all.
Sure.
And great, please do give my regards to everybody in Britain whom I know and miss, and hope someday to be able to see again on British soil.